Scott just made the point.
Jefferson used to be a lot more secure, not just. On Sunday, 2 Islamic terrorists attempted to gain entry to a provocative art contest in Garland, Texas, in which a prize of $10,000 was awarded for the best caricature of the Prophet Muhammad. The gunmen, armed with semi-automatic weapons, leapt out of their car, opened fire, and managed to wound a security guard. An off-duty police officer, armed with only a pistol, immediately shot both gunmen dead. Naturally, the left puts the blame squarely on event organizer Pamela Geller for daring to exercise her First Amendment rights and for encouraging others to do the same. I'm Steve Green. This is Trifecta. Let's get Scott Ott and Bill Whittle on here and see what we can learn from this terrible but ultimately unsuccessful attack on American liberty. Scott, Garland, that's not too far from your neck of the woods in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. What can you tell us about what happened locally on Sunday and then in the following days, especially in Austin, the capital?
Well, you know, it's funny. I understand there were about 200 or 300 people there at the free speech event in Garland, and there would have been a lot more Texans show up to that event. There were people who came from all around the country, but there would have been a lot more Texans there, but for the fact that you had to pass through a metal detector to get into the event, and that, of course, would have taken hours to disarm all the Texans as they were passing through that. You know, it's funny because around here, you see the Drudge Report headline that says ISIS fear in Texas. And around here, I have not encountered anybody who's expressing anything approaching fear. The basic attitude is, hey, you know, it's, as I restate that Drudge headline, it's not ISIS fear in Texas, it's ISIS cure in Texas. We know how to deal with that.
You sure do. You know what, Scott, I want to give you a follow-up here. The New York Times reported this story on Sunday night and described Geller as anti-Islam. And they ended the story with this bit from the paper. It said, Ms. Geller described Sunday's event as pro-free speech and said that Muslims had become a special class that Americans were no longer allowed to offend. The media is self-enforcing a Sharia, she said, referring to Islamic law. Under the Sharia, you cannot criticize or offend Islam. Scott, do you think that's true? If Americans try and force other Americans to shut up about Islam, that they really are imposing, even if only in a small degree, some sort of Sharia law?
Absolutely. And one of the greatest presidents for that side of the aisle said we have nothing to fear but fear itself. And that is exactly the purpose of terrorism. Terrorism's purpose isn't body count necessarily. Terrorism's purpose is to do just enough to scare the pants off everybody so that you can get what you want without actually having to win a war, without actually having to get elected, without actually having to legislate it. And if you self-censor and say, you know what, there is one class of people that we're just, you know, we want to reverence their God and show them respect, and we're not going to make fun of them. Well, then I say you do that for all classes of people. Say, no matter what it is, we're never going to say anything that could possibly offend anybody. You know that they won't do that standard. The only standard they have is the standard that says, hey, what's going to get my head chopped off? Whoever those people are, we're not going to ruffle their feathers.
Yeah, we've seen how that works overseas. That's why we have a First Amendment. And you know, it's not just the New York Times. On MSNBC, Christopher Matthews said Geller invited the attack by setting, and this is his word, a mousetrap for those gunmen. Now, he didn't say if Geller's skirt was too short, if perhaps she should have worn a burqa to the event. But then Geller went on CNN and got similar treatment.
And the idea that we can't... that this warrants the violence that you saw. I mean, I haven't heard anyone in the saying that it's okay for gunmen to show up at an event like this. But what people are saying is that there's always this fine line, you know, between freedom of speech and being intentionally incendiary and provocative.
Intentionally incendiary and provocative by drawing a cartoon. This is the low state of freedom of speech in this country.
Bill, the news media, they sure seem eager to blame the victim yet again. But surely we could expect the president to offer a robust defense of our First Amendment right not to be shot over a drawing, yeah?
How many of these have we done now? We've done a couple. We've done 1,200 trifectas, I think. Something like that. We've done over 1,000, certainly. This is the most disturbing thing I've ever seen. It's not the shooting. That's enough to get your attention. That's a milestone that's going to go down in the history books. It's the first time there's an Islamic terrorist attack in America, you know, sponsored by ISIS or at least approved of by ISIS. That's one for the record books. You know, sometimes they say this, I don't believe this, but every now and then you hear people say there's no such thing as an accident. I never, ever, 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 ever get to see the clips before we roll the show, ever. Just this one time I happened to step in the booth just before the show was taped, and I saw this clip about 10 minutes before we taped it. And it's a good thing we did, too, because my actual response to this clip was a compound verb uttered at the top of my lungs. I mean, at the top of my lungs. Where do you go with this? There's a fine line? There's no line. There's no line, you idiot. It's free speech or it isn't. There's no line. And to say that these people deserve this, they drew some Prophet Muhammad cartoons, and they deserve to get shot up. They set a mousetrap. Well, first of all, my response to you, Chris Matthews, you miserable, low-life coward. You have the audacity to make a living giving your opinion on American television, and now you're going to say that this thing was that these people deserve this, the same way that Gary Trudeau said that the people in Charlie Hebdo deserve to be butchered in their chairs because they drew cartoons just like he did? You have got a lot of nerve. You don't deserve to live in this country. None of you deserve to live in this country. And if you want to know what the basis of this is, you got it exactly right, Scott. It's cowardice and it's fear. These weasels, these lowlifes, these traitors in the media are saying, oh, well, you guys kind of deserved it. You shouldn't have pushed the Muslims that hard. What they're really saying is, I'm putting a marker down for when the day comes when somebody's holding a knife to my throat, and I'll be able to say, no, I was on your side. I was on your side. I wasn't on the side of the nasty Texas guys. I was on your side, ISIS. I took your side. I completely sympathize with your position. And that'll be the last words out of your mouth before you start guggling blood out of your throat. You miserable low-life cowards. And if this is a mousetrap, by the way, if it is a mousetrap, then I say let's set about 1,000 of them. Let's set 1,000 of these ISIS traps and set them all in Texas, because that's apparently the only place left in the entire United States where there's any men left or any honor left or any courage left. Not just men, by the way, heavily armed women in Texas, who I admire very much too. This whole thing is an absolute catastrophe. And the President of the United States of America, who's the first person to say, oh, well, Trayvon Martin could have been my son, or the Michael Brown thing is a terrible catastrophe. And anytime anything happens to anybody who he agrees with, absolutely silent about this, absolutely silent. So guess what, America? There is no government, there is no president, there is no army, there is no command structure, there's nothing. It's us against these people, and we better get used to it right now. It's the American people versus ISIS, and if you think the government is here to help you, you're out of your mind. The government is here to prosecute American citizens who will defend themselves against ISIS. That's what the government is here for. But as they say in the right-wing lunatic knuckle-dragging nut job case, better to be tried by 12 people than carried by 6. And that's how I feel about it. I've never been so angry in my life. And I actually hope that the day comes when people like that blonde idiot, narrows it down, doesn't it? I wasn't talking about Chris Matthews, this idiot on CNN. I hope they get a chance to see what it looks like on their knees with a knife at their throat. And then they get to have a chance to tell them how much they were on their side and how much they understood the suffering that they go through when somebody draws a cartoon about the Prophet Muhammad. I hope that's the last thought they have.
You know, back in January, 2 Islamist gunmen walked into the office of Charlie Hebdo magazine and killed 11 people and injured 11 more, again, for the imaginary crime of insulting the Prophet Muhammad. Now, the terrorists escaped. They killed 5 more, some for the imaginary crime of being Jewish, and injured yet another 11. They were finally killed by police 2 days later in a massive Paris-wide manhunt. In Texas, 2 terrorists tried a very similar stunt, and the only ones who ended up dead were the terrorists themselves for the very real crime of trying to murder people. In France, citizens are disarmed by law. In America, citizens are armed by constitutional right. The rest of the world can call us cowboys if they like, but it's the cowboy who rides off into the sunset to live and to speak another day. For Bill Whittle and Scott Ott, I'm Steve Green.